Hello, hello. Hi, folks. Um, okay, I'm going to invite the participants. I hate that I can't do this instantly, so bear with me for a second. Okay. Invite to join. Man. Hello. Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. We're doing the Instagram Live shuffle for a second, so give us a second to get everyone on. But hello, I hope you're all doing well. Okay, there we go.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, folks.
There you go. I want to remain vertical.
Can we be vertical? I don't know why I'm bigger than you guys. I should be smaller.
It's probably because of your ego, I would say.
I'm not meant to be so big, but am I big on your end too? We should be even. This should be equality.
Probably because you're the host, you know? You're the MC.
Okay, well, spiritually, I want to push you guys up top, so anyone watching can cover my face up, and then they'll get it right. So hello, Stephen. Hello, Robert.
Hello. How are you doing, Stephen? Nice to meet you. We've never met in person.
Thank you. Likewise, very much respect to you and also to you, Ari. Thank you for inviting.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. How are you doing, Ari?
I'm good. I've been working on. I went to the screening of Extrapolations last night. There was a special screening here in LA, and talked to some of the creators of that. And it's interesting, this discussion about how we tell stories about the planet and different ways of doing it. And they've very clearly said, there should be 1 million stories being told about our planet. And so I've been very much in the thick of this subject. I don't know, Stephen, if you are comfortable, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and give a little bit of background about your incredible story, so that those who are meeting you for the first time know who's with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. In a nutshell, I'm an attorney, and for many, many years, over 20 years, have been representing indigenous people, the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador, in a huge litigation against Chevron over the deliberate dumping of billions of gallons of cancer-causing toxic waste onto indigenous ancestral lands in the Amazon. This happened, by the way, in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, still out there, causing cancers and literally killing people with cancer. We won the case, historic litigation back in 2013 for around $10 billion. Chevron has refused to pay, and we're still battling them to recover the money. In the meantime, they went after me here in New York, and they got a judge to lock me up for almost 3 years because I refused to give them my computer and all my confidential case file. I came out of that like a year ago, and I'm still, we're still fighting, and they're still trying to hurt me and destroy me. It's been almost 3 years, by the way, right where I'm sitting right now, my 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan, where I live with my son. I had an ankle bracelet on the whole time. Slept with it, ate with it, showered with it. So I'm the first person, real human rights lawyer in the United States, ever locked up in retaliation for being successful in the litigation. And just one other thing I want to mention real quick. I was prosecuted for my criminal.
Sorry, 1 second. Can I interrupt you for just 1 sec, Stephen?
Sure.
Robbie, would you mind muting your mic while he's talking? Because I think there's some background noise. Thank you.
In any event, I was not prosecuted by the government. I was prosecuted by Chevron directly. A private Chevron lawyer was appointed by a judge to act in the name of the U.S. government and be my prosecutor after the regular federal prosecutor refused to prosecute me. So I'm the only person in U.S. history ever prosecuted by a private corporation. And that's why I'm also the only lawyer ever charged with criminal contempt who's been locked up and for almost 3 years. And also I spent 6 weeks in a federal prison. But I'm good, and I'm really happy to be here with you guys, and much respect to both of you, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so I just want to fill in case there was some audio issues at the beginning there. Just Stephen won the largest ever judgment against an oil company for what's essentially the Chernobyl of South America. A lot of death and cancer and destruction of the rainforest, and he won this incredible case. And the response of Chevron was to come after him privately in a absolutely staggering, from a legal perspective, way, where he ended up imprisoned for doing his legal work, which is so far beyond, it seems like science fiction, but this is something that actually happened. And Stephen had to wear, he was in prison, he had to wear an ankle bracelet for a long time for winning a huge case against Chevron to protect indigenous people in Ecuador. So anyway, in case some of that was missed, it's such an amazing story. It should be a movie. I hope it will be a movie. As a way of getting this story across. But I brought us together because Robbie is so interested in finding ways to tell stories that wake people up ecologically, and he's been doing comics and working with Rewriting Extinction. You want to talk a little bit about your work to raise consciousness, Robbie?
Well, you know, I suppose today my role is to come on and listen to Stephen, really. Because today I think that's what the story's about. For my part, I've been doing bits and pieces, collaborating with people like yourself, Ari, who are figuring out ways of telling effective climate change stories so that they don't bore the arse off people or scare people to death or make people feel kind of overwhelmed and powerless, but actually, you know, would be sort of engage people's interest and fascination and, you know, go away like they've learned something. And to feel kind of connected to the climate change story. It's a very abstract thing, you know. Even, you know, when we say here on Instagram that Stephen successfully sued Chevron, the giant American oil company, for about $10 billion because of the amount of damage that they did in Ecuador and South America. You know, it's hard to kind of bridge the gap between the sort of the academic information and where it gets you in the heart, you know. And I think that's kind of what's missing from the great transition to sort of renewable energy, the democratization of energy and everything else, is that enough people are kind of moving along as though it's just going to kind of sort itself out, and you know, someone's going to invent something somewhere and fix it. But really it takes enough people going, hang on a minute, we are the most destructive, most wasteful members of our species there ever has been on this planet. And you know, that's a very overwhelming thing to take on, but you know, we have to figure it out. You know, we have to sort of tell the stories and raise as much awareness as possible. So for my part today, I feel like I'm kind of lending a hand in listening and hopefully kind of directing other people to hearing this story and hearing about the idea that an energy company can corrupt, right? I mean, I'm speaking now, I'm speculating, right? But it's the writing's on the wall, Chevron, that they can corrupt the Supreme Court in the United States of America to target a lawyer who has essentially legally proven that they've caused $10 billion worth of damage. You know, that's the sort of state. And I read a couple of articles, Stephen, about how you were talking about how this indicates that Chevron and other gigantic energy provision companies are in great fear, I think, of the change. in great fear of the democratization of energy. The idea that we're going to create energy models, or are already creating energy models in the present day to democratize energy so that everybody has more access to energy and there's less a monopoly of energy being controlled like the crowd like Chevron, you know. So I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of this story for me, is that the way that they've come down on an individual, Stephen Donziger here, with such a disproportionate force, and have even just, you know, even stepped into the kind of arena of corruption to try to silence Stephen, is proof of the fact that they are terrified, I think, of the fact that the world is changing and technology is making it far easier for people to access energy and not have to go through a giant, pollutive, corrupt dinosaur like Chevron. Do you know what I mean? So other than that, I really just want to hear and listen more to Stephen and his story, and all the stories, really.
Thank you for those comments, Robert. Love your work, love your heart, love your soul, love how you're thinking about these issues. I love your support. You know, I want to also say this. You know, Chevron and the court system in the United States is trying to use me to distract attention from the environmental crimes they committed in the Amazon. You know, it's tricky for me because I need to be protected and I'm in a difficult situation. It's tricky. But I also think it's important that we don't focus too much on me and we sort of think first and foremost about the indigenous peoples in the Amazon. I mean, imagine this, and want to talk about storytelling. You know, when I first went to the Amazon in the early 1990s, and I've been there over 250 times, I live in New York, you know, to work on this. I literally saw like large lakes of oil gouged out of this jungle floor of this pristine ecosystem that Chevron had done deliberately as a way to dispose of toxic waste. And on top of that, they had put pipes into the sides of these pits, and they were you know, discharging this toxic oil waste, carcinogenic as benzene, toluene, you know, some of the most harmful carcinogenic hydrocarbons on Earth. And they were running it deliberately into rivers and streams that the indigenous peoples relied on for their drinking water. I mean, they essentially deliberately poisoned the drinking water supply in the Amazon that 5 indigenous groups, not to mention dozens of other farmer communities, relied on to survive, to drink water, to fish, to bathe. And, you know, this area had been beautifully prosperous for millennia. And in probably 5 to 10 years, because of these practices, Chevron essentially poisoned it in 5 or 10 years when it had existed for millennia. And in so doing, they decimated these indigenous cultures, and they're hurtling some of these groups literally to extinction as we know them, because they can no longer survive off the forest because of the poisoning that took place.
So, Stephen, you said they intentionally poisoned waterways and lakes and so on. Was their intention to extract the oil, and the poisoning of the waterways was like collateral damage?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean they set out to kill people. What I'm trying to say is, when you design a system of oil extraction, you can do it according to standards, meaning you take look, every oil drilling produces oil waste. So the question is, what do you do with it? And in most countries where there's proper regulation, you have to dispose of it safely. That usually means re-injecting it thousands of feet underground, like back into a different well cavity. And in Ecuador, because they felt like they could get away with it, it was isolated geographically. You know, the people that lived there were indigenous. I think there was some racism involved, but for whatever the reason, the deliberate intent came from the fact that they could have done it safely, and they chose to just dump it. And, you know, when you make that choice, it's clearly foreseeable that people are going to be hurt and ultimately over time exposed to toxins in a way that many will develop cancer and die. So when I say they deliberately poisoned I don't know if that's exactly the best way to describe it. They deliberately chose a method of production to intentionally dump billions of gallons of cancer-causing waste into the environment. It was that part of it was deliberate.
As far as I'm aware, and please correct me, so Chevron refused to pay the 9.5 or $10 billion that the Ecuadorian government had deemed that they pay. Sorry, not the Ecuadorian government.
The U.S. government, right?
The U.S. government.
Yeah.
No.
Or the U.S. court.
No, it was an Ecuadorian court that ordered them to pay for the cleanup after an 8-year trial. Another key point is the trial was heard in Ecuador at Chevron's request. The case was initially filed in the United States. They wanted it in Ecuador, I think because they had operated there for 30 years with impunity, even though they had been dumping the toxic waste. So they're like, oh, let's go to Ecuador. You know, they're not going to have the power to hold us accountable. And with a great Ecuadorian legal team, I was in support. I helped raise money, advise, but the Ecuadorian lawyers went into court and they basically presented the evidence, and a court found that Chevron was liable for this massive damage, as we all expected, by the way, given that you can just go down there to this day and look at it, and you can see the damage they did, and you can still see these lakes of oil gouged out of the jungle floor. They've never been cleaned up. So we expected to win the case. Their whole strategy was to obstruct the case, to sabotage the trial, because they knew the evidence was against them.
That's a mad thing. And then the case was essentially retried in the US, wasn't it?
What happened? Well, so after the communities in Ecuador won this case and it was affirmed on appeal by Ecuador's Supreme Court, Chevron said they would never pay the judgment. They removed all their assets from Ecuador. And they basically challenged the indigenous groups, who have virtually no money, to chase them around the world trying to collect their assets in other countries. Parallel to that, I mean, that's a terrible thing, by the way, and it's really hard to go, ask people who are, beat up and had really violence inflicted upon them through this poisoning, to somehow find lawyers in Canada or Australia or other countries and go after this giant oil company that has billions of dollars. That's really hard. But we were able to make some progress in that. In Canada, we won a Supreme Court decision there in favor of the Ecuadorians. But parallel to that process, they went after me personally and tried to destroy me, which led to my detention. So there's like two parallel legal proceedings. There's the real case, which the affected communities won against Chevron, that Chevron's fighting to not pay that judgment. And then there's this retaliation case that Chevron filed against me with the help of a judge who is very pro-corporate and actually has investments in Chevron. They've been proceeding against me now for 10 or 12 years. And that case includes a defamation campaign. They tried to demonize me. If you Google me, a lot of the first things that come up are, Chevron paid ads claiming I'm a criminal, et cetera, et cetera. So, I've been targeted with a vicious, well-financed corporate retaliation campaign for a number of years that ultimately led to my false imprisonment. I just want to add one thing. I said I'm good. Like, in a weird way, that whole experience empowered me. I mean, I got so much support. 68 Nobel laureates, a bunch of U.S. Congress people backed me, 120 NGOs, Amnesty International, Greenpeace, Rainforest Action Network, Global Witness. So many groups signed a letter to President Biden asking him to get, or I should say our Attorney General Garland, to knock off this private prosecution and release me. Of course, unfortunately, Joe Biden didn't, or Garland didn't do that. And I ended up serving all this time. But as a result, we are stronger and we are continuing with the case. And we're really able to get through this because of support. I mean, even doing this Instagram Live with you, Robert, and you, Ari, is important. It's important to convey to the world that people are listening and this is resonating. Because, when Chevron sort of looks at the whole landscape and decides what to do or what not to do, they're trying to figure out who they have to go through. And if I'm sitting alone, in this apartment, that's sort of one picture. But if I'm protected by Robert and Ari and the Nobels and, others who've really been there, Susan Sarandon, Chris Smalls, Francis Fisher, and Roger Waters and Sting and Trudy Styler and so many others are really, those are just obviously the well-known people. There's thousands of regular heroes who have really been behind me. It's very hard to get through that if you're Chevron. So, I need the support, and this kind of thing, is meant to help, spread the word, obviously, but it also actually protects me from their attacks.
So in terms of like a call to action for people watching, like what should people do? Like what someone watching wherever they're in their bedroom in Scotland or Argentina or New York, what can people do right now when this is over to support you and to support the causes that we all care about? What would you say?
So yeah, the answer is very simple. Next week, we are starting a petition to urge President Biden to pardon me. Basically, I run out of legal options in terms of my conviction for contempt, which, by the way, they took my law license as a result of that. I'm a lawyer, but I can't practice law. And they also have confiscated my passport such that I can't leave the country to do my job as a human rights advocate. So we're launching a petition to fix that problem. And the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, I know that's a mouthful, but it's a human rights body. 5 international lawyers are like judges. And they already ruled against the U.S. government calling my detention illegal and an arbitrary deprivation of my liberty. And they call for the government to fix the problem by compensating me for that deprivation of my liberty and also to investigate how this could have happened. Now, the U.S. historically, the U.S. government, that is, doesn't really get super excited about complying with international law. I mean, sort of, we judges in this country generally feel like, oh, we're just better than every other country when it comes to our laws. We don't need to listen to that. So it's very hard to get the U.S. government to move. But it is a fact, a determined fact by the United Nations, that the way I was treated by our judicial system violates the law, international law, as applied to this country. It's based on treaties signed by the United States and obviously many other countries. So we're going to launch a pardon campaign, and we're putting it together now. We're planning to launch it on Tuesday of next week, just before the first anniversary of my release. And you can access all of this information on our website, if I may give the information. It's freedonziger.com, FREEDONZIGER. But this is kind of bizarre because it's not yet up. So
well, if people can also follow Stephen.
When it's up, just sign it.
Everyone follow Stephen on Instagram now. You can also follow him on Twitter if you're on Twitter. And I'm sure you'll have the direct links and you'll post them in a couple days when those are up.
Yeah, and on Instagram, you have right here, and on Twitter, I'm at @Donziger, and I'm giving case updates all the time. And the other issue, by the way, is I'm litigating to get my passport back and to protect myself. And I have to. Many of the lawyers who help me do it pro bono. Others can't. They need funds, so we raise money. There's a donate button on my page, but that's less important, frankly, than people enlisting in the campaign. So if you're able to go to the page, give us your email, your information, and you'll get our updates. And we're trying to create a movement. I've had over 100,000 people sign up on my website. It's crazy, since I was detained. And I'm not like a super well-known guy. I mean, it's crazy. But people,
go ahead. This is something that when I think about like the Tennessee 3. What has happened in the U.S. and those who don't know, there were 3 state representatives who were kicked out for loudly protesting against the gun lobby, and they were temporarily kicked out of the state house in a way that looked to some of us like fascism, but it backfired in the sense that it turned them into living martyrs who then could raise actually had bigger voices than they had before. So the hope is with someone like you, Stephen, and this idea of like, for me as a storyteller, like this is an incredible story. It happens to be a true story, but people do gravitate to stories, and that becomes, because it's such an amazing metaphor for the corruption of our society, to have, Chevron, have a private corporation prosecute an individual for winning a case against it is just, it's so outlandish that you wouldn't believe it if it weren't true. But that's an amazing story for people to galvanize people to join you, to join your movement, and then you can become a, you know, you have a bigger bullhorn because of that, essentially.
Well, I'll say, you know, you talked about the Tennessee three. You know, when the other side overreaches, it's really creates a hell of an opportunity for our side, if you think about it. And I think that those, you know, the two gentlemen and the lady in Tennessee did a brilliant job creating an opportunity out of an attempt to silence them. And I've tried to do the same thing with what Chevron has tried to do to me. You're exactly right, Ari. It's really important to sort of see these attempts to shut people up as opportunities to speak even louder. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. By the way, I've been talking a lot. I'd love to hear more from Robert on, you know, what you think of all this crazy stuff.
Honestly, I'm just sort of absorbing as best I can. And one question that popped up that I thought was pertinent to ask, I think it came via the Shehab, was, can international people sign this petition, Stephen, for people around the world in different parts, not just the US?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I'll add that the initial decision from the United Nations, the petition was filed by international lawyers who I'd never even met. They called me up. They wrote this brilliant petition. I kind of had forgotten about it. And like a year later, this ruling came out that stunned me. You know, it gave such credibility to everything I'd been saying, or our team had been saying for years, how this was completely illegal, you know, what they were doing to me. And I'll add, this is kind of a crazy twist, but I ended up getting convicted. I was denied a jury, and I got convicted of criminal contempt of court, a misdemeanor charge. No lawyer had ever spent one day in jail on this charge. And I'm innocent, or it is my view I am innocent. But even if I were guilty, the longest sentence ever given a lawyer for this charge was 90 days of home confinement. And I am the only one found guilty of this it's the most minor offense in the federal system. And I spent almost 3 years, over 993 days. So over 10 times the longest sentence I was detained. And I was prosecuted again, not by the government, which rejected the case, but by a Chevron private lawyer. And it's just so wrong. And I took this to the US Supreme Court, which finally ruled just 2 weeks ago. They denied my appeal, but look, it's obviously a very conservative court. But even that court was offended by the clear violation of the rule of law that happened in my case. And two of the justices wrote just a great dissent, essentially saying that what happened to me was illegal, unconstitutional, and that they would throw out the entire case. But unfortunately, I couldn't get any of the three liberals on the court to back me. And ultimately, the case is now over, which is why we're going to be seeking a pardon from President Biden.
Stephen, to get to where the rubber meets the road, this judge that convicted you this way, you said he has investments in Chevron. I also read that he received charitable donations, or there was charitable donations made to a foundation that he's connected to. So would you tell us a small bit more about that?
Yeah, so the judge who orchestrated this, judges here have to sort of disclose their finances to some degree, a limited degree. And we noticed he had money in a mutual fund and we looked it up, and they had significant investments in Chevron. He never disclosed that prior to this case. And then to go after me without a jury, the criminal contempt charge, he appointed the Chevron lawyer to prosecute me, but he also appointed another judge to preside over the case. And she is a major official in the Federalist Society, where Chevron is a major donor. And then on top of that, when I appealed to the Supreme Court, I found out that the US Supreme Court has a private charity, a foundation, to which litigants before the court can actually make donations. And each of the last several years, Chevron itself, while my case has been pending, has donated $200,000 to the Supreme Court Foundation, while they're litigating before the court. So it just stinks. I don't know what else to say. And, you know, the United States fashions itself as such a rule of law country. I don't want to trash our entire judiciary. We have some really good judges. But, like, how can our Supreme Court have a private foundation to which litigants before the court with cases before the court can donate? It makes I know of no other country in the world whose courts have this sort of setup. So it's just wrong. I've called for the court to dissolve the charity. You know, I'm not saying that's why I lost. They denied my appeal, but I mean, come on, that kind of stuff has something to do with how decision-making processes work.
What, Stephen? What does a Supreme Court foundation? What do they do with the money? You know, what do they even say publicly that they do with the donations?
I mean, this is really kind of funny. Their stated mission is to promote the rule of law. I mean, think about that. They're taking money, creating conflicts that are prohibited by law, and their mission is to promote the rule of law. It's crazy. The other thing is, it's interesting, Robert, is every year they have a fundraising dinner, a black tie dinner in Washington. And if you give $5,000 or more dollars, you can go to the dinner. You know, so obviously Chevron's top lawyer is at the dinner, and I'll say his name is R. Hewitt Tate. He is also on the board of trustees of the Supreme Court Foundation, Chevron's top lawyer. So, you know, they claim they promote the rule of law. I mean, I don't know.
George Carlin, I think, said United States is an oil company with an army. I mean,
United
it's a bit
States
brutal, but
I'm sure that the United States Supreme Court is funded by the government. You know, it's funded by the taxpayer. I'm sure they paid salary. So what's this promote the rule of law thing through charitable donations? That stinks, really.
I mean, so much in this country, and we're so much worse than Canada or the UK, the Commonwealth nations. I mean, the level of corporate money flowing into all branches of our government, including the judiciary, is off the charts. I mean, it's almost like the corporate class has bought out our government. And, you know, how else do you explain prosecuted in the name of the government by a corporation and detained? You know, so look, there's judges also who hold the line, you know, who try to block this stuff. But there's many other judges who've been put in, many by Trump when he was in power. You know, the presidents appoint our federal judges, and they're just really, really aggressively activist, pro-corporate, right-wing, anti-regulatory, and they hate lawyers like me who fight for human rights. They just don't like us.
So do you think there's a world where Robbie, I mean, this story, people have been saying this should be a movie, right? I mean, Robbie and I are filmmakers of different sorts, but how much impact do you think it has to, you know, like you look back at like Aaron Brockovich, the movie, right? How much power does it have to tell a story like this, a true story like this, versus creating new stories that, you know, deal with what we're doing to the planet and corruption and everything else?
Well, my view is any story, whether it's fact or fiction, as long as it's effective and can raise consciousness, has to be told. You know, I mean, sometimes, you know, fact is better than fiction. Like, I never could have written this story that's actually happened to me. I mean, if you had told me 20 years ago this would happen, I'd be like, you're just batshit crazy. I mean, there's people to this day, you know, I work with a lot of interns, and one recently said, I told my dad what happened to you, and he said, there's just no way. He didn't believe that. That just can't happen, you know? And it's almost so out there, it's not even plausible, but it happened.
Yeah,
you know,
it boggles the mind. It absolutely boggles the mind. I mean, when I first started reading about this story,
I love the work of both of you guys, and you know, maybe we ought to have a conversation about doing something, because I do think this story needs to be told. And you know, and Robert would probably, I mean, I don't mean to book you for your future gigs, but I think my guess is you'd do really well trying to play me.
I sent him pictures last week of you in the Amazon from 20, 30 years ago, and I was like, do you see a resemblance?
I've grown old on this case, but I think I started when, I don't know how old Robert is. I think you're probably what, in your early 30s? When I started this case, I was
He's going to
31.
He's going to be 19 soon. Right?
You started this case at what time of your life, Stephen? When did you start?
I went to university, was a journalist for 5 years, went to law school. By the way, I was in the same class as Barack Obama, if you can believe it, at Harvard Law. Got out of law school, I was 28. And I had a job as a litigator. And then a couple years later, I went down to Ecuador and we started the case. I think I was 30 or 31. It was 1993.
Wow.
And how long were you on the case before before you got the positive judgment and then stuff started to go sideways?
It took 18 years to finish the trial and get the judgment, 18 years. And by the way, the reason it took so long primarily is because Chevron's entire strategy was to obstruct the trial. I mean, they knew it was cheaper to pay lawyers to just file thousands of motions than to, their worst nightmare was to actually have to defend the merits of the claims, that we had brought, our clients had brought. So it took a really, really long time. I mean, like, people were really hurting. Many people passed away during that time because of the exposure to the oil waste. But we finally did win, but they vowed never to pay. As a matter of fact, their lead lawyers made a famous statement at the time. He said, we're going to fight the indigenous peoples until hell freezes over, and then we're going to fight it out on the ice. He said that, their lawyer, publicly. And it's all just intimidation. I mean, it's, they don't really look at litigating as a way to try to figure out the truth, They look at litigating, they look at the courts as just another tool of their own power that they can wield to try to hurt people. And that's what they tried to do to me. And, we, the other lawyers on the team, the Ecuadorians, Pablo Fajardo, and Alejandro Ponce, Julio Prieto, and others, like great lawyers. Like, we have always stood for the principle of the rule of law, and we are going to keep fighting in the courts until they are forced to pay. And that's the plan.
If we were making this movie and I was playing you, Stephen, ultimately this case and the corruption of it everything points to a sort of a choice that humanity has to make, which is, do we allow the rule of law, the courts, to be overwhelmed by corporate power so that business people who, exist, ultimately for profit, get to live in a completely different class to everybody else, to get to sort of steamroll over the courts of law that preside over everybody else. And then you're into like, well, look at all the corporations who have the power and the resources to do that. If Chevron gets away with this, there's innumerable other gigantic corporations who will see that as precedent. They're like, well, we can just go and do that and be completely reckless with the planet, with people's lives. That's what's at stake here, I think, if Chevron wins. If Chevron wins, then, the whole judicial system, it falls over,
I think that's exactly right. And I think that, look, there's a broader issue of corporate control of our courts and our government and our society. Okay, there's a sub issue, which is in this case is a bellwether case. Where Chevron is sort of using it as a lab experiment to see how much, using literally $3 billion, they've used 60 law firms against me, 60, okay? And they're trying to figure out if by spending all of this money to try to attack me, getting their own private prosecution, getting me locked up in prison, is going to pay off as an investment. I mean, it's a lab experiment for the oil industry. And if we're able to get the recovery on behalf of the indigenous peoples of Ecuador, such that they can clean up their ancestral lands and they can restore their cultures and restore the forest, that will be a precedent that frankly terrifies the whole industry, which is why they're spending so much money to target me. But, we have the power of numbers, right? Like, there's millions of people who support this kind of work. And we just need to organize it, you know, and mobilize it, and ultimately keep fighting. Because, you know, look at history. I mean, shit. You know, look at the history of the United States. We had apartheid laws in this country, and it took decades and decades of a litigation strategy just to get rid of the laws on the books that were, you know, blatantly racist, you know, through the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board. Okay. That took, people don't realize, that took decades of work in the courts, in various courts. You know, we've been doing this 28 years. This is a paradigm shifting case. Indigenous peoples have never had the opportunity they've never gotten this far in this kind of environmental case. The outcome is also intimately connected to the planet, right? The survival of the planet. Like, we cannot let these polluters get away with continuing to destroy the earth. So it connects to the climate movement. And it also connects to whether our democracy survives. Because, you know, if in fighting for the climate and fighting for justice for these communities in the Amazon, I get locked up, what does that say about our freedom, our right to advocate? You know, so there's a lot in the mix here, and there's a lot at stake. And, you know, it's not, you know, look, it's about me at one level. It's really not it goes so far beyond me at 10 other levels. And we have to understand that.
Well, like you said, you're a litmus test to see if they can get away with doing this to someone who's actually successfully fought them. So I'm sorry, I'm reading a lot of comments where people are talking about Avatar. So I want to bring it up just because it's, you know, we are, the two of us anyway, are in the entertainment field. I mean, what do you think about a movie like Avatar that takes this kind of fight and turns it into kind of a candy entertainment, but with its root, it is sort of about, you know, indigenous style cultures fighting back against a corporate machine. I mean, is there a value in movies like that kind of turn it into popcorn, or do you think the story should be told about the real thing because the real thing is so incredible? I mean, I throw it to Robert on that. I'm curious what you think.
I must say, I saw Avatar 2 over Christmas, and it was winter and rainy in the Midlands of Ireland, and I went into a cinema and went to Pandora for 3 hours and 10 minutes and had an absolute ball. I loved that movie. And in fairness to Cameron, there are these long sequences with these fictional animals. You know, it's like this sort of love letter to life. And I think there's room for both. I think there's definitely room for both. There's the room for to kind of sort of abstractify something which is, you know, I think compared to like Erin Brockovich or The Insider, was that the Michael Mann film with Russell Crowe
about the tobacco industry,
big cigarettes? Yeah, like those films are undoubtedly, they're consciousness changing, you know, and they have to continue to be told. But there's definitely room for both, you know. I think James Cameron is, you know, he's a born storyteller, incredibly ambitious one. And I loved the escapism of it. I suppose that's what kind of creates the distinction between a story like this and an Avatar 2, where the sky people, who are named in the movie, by the way, as the U.S. Marines.
Yeah, that blew my mind. That he didn't,
yeah, we talked about it.
He didn't come at it by calling the bad guys, you know, some corporate thing that he made up, but he called them Marines. And I was shocked.
He called them a bit like the U.S. government, you know, but because it is literally an escape from Earth, the movie, that it just, you know, I suppose it's more palatable. It sort of draws the veil of entertainment over it.
Oh, where he's playing with that idea that, you know, the military may be bought by, if the military is bought out by corporations, then it may have the U.S. name on it, but it's not representing the United States. It's representing, you know, extraction companies.
I think, because, you know, I spoke to one man who he said his corporation is the first one to have the right to mine resources from the surface of the moon, right? And he's not a government; he's a corporation. He says he's the first corporation to have outer space rights, you know, to go and harvest energy, essentially. So that is probably how it's going to happen to some degree, that corporations have the scope and the reach and the ambition to do these things probably further than any government has. And so the role of the government has to be about regulation ultimately, and controlling how rampant these corporations become ultimately in their pursuit of profit.
This is where I think storytelling becomes so important, because you know, I believe, I mean, even people have talked about David and Goliath in the chat here, which is, you know, on its surface a beautiful story of the little guy fighting back against the big guy, which is sort of what they do in Avatar. And you know, someone else pointed out there's a patriarchal aspect to the way it's framed, which you know, has its own issues around it. But you know, the David and Goliath story, as I can't remember who pointed this out, but it's essentially a story of better weaponry. David has a better weapon than Goliath. So we think it's a story of the little guy fighting the big guy, but it's actually the story of technology and weaponry. So the message may not be as transformational as we want it to be. You know, we like the idea maybe of a, you know, a 7-8-year-old coming out and being in love with the forest, let's say, after seeing Avatar, and the beauty that with which it's depicted may bring that. But if the message is ultimately that I got to get a better weapon to wedge it in, you know, to wedge it into the big machine's craw, that may not work. You know, there may be a deeper transformation that's required of us as a species, as souls. You know, the kinds of stories we tell to kids or to ourselves, or the kinds of stories we tell ourselves when we're dreaming at night, may need to be something that's totally different than anything that our culture has. And that may come from indigenous culture. And, you know, maybe Stephen, I don't know if you ever went into that realm with your, you know, in your work with the indigenous people down there, but the kinds of stories they tell, the kinds of the ways that, you know, villains get overcome in indigenous storytelling is very different than the way Avatar tells that story. And I think we got to reset the way we tell stories personally, because we got to change the way we dream. And if you dream a different way, you wake up and you would never tolerate what happened to you, Stephen. You know, you would be horrified. And so people turning their back to that truth, or, you know, voting for people who throw the earth and the air and the water into the toilet would be impossible if you dream in a different way.
And maybe that way has to do with embracing Chevron. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think people in Chevron are profoundly competitive, you know? That's how they live their lives. That's their sort of, it's their meal ticket is profit and pleasing the board of trustees, or whatever the design of the corporation is. But ultimately, if we sort of take the villain and offer them inclusion and love, and obviously I don't mean this in I don't mean dropping the case or anything like that. I just mean making people like the competitive, parasitic, extractive groups of us like Chevron, making them understand that they're part of us as well. Do you know what I mean? And they're not a villain. Sometimes these companies behave so villainously. It's
you brought up one of the central things, this idea of competitiveness, right?
Yeah.
You know, no matter where you are in Western society now, we have this idea of survival of the fittest, right? You know, and it's cooked into the Judeo-Christian tradition, and it's cooked into the Darwinian tradition as well. Both of them have this idea that you got to kind of like fight to get what you need to survive.
American dream, really, in one way.
The Project Fogtown that I'm working on, you know, has this idea of one of the central myths that they say that this gang is saying is life is a race for survival, and ultimately they've got to figure out that life is a dance. And if you think of life as a dance instead of a race or a fight for survival, you behave totally differently. So someone like from Chevron, if they're thinking, okay, I gotta, you know, worry about my next, you know, quarterly statement, and I gotta fight against Exxon, and Exxon's extracting from Nigeria, so we gotta extract from Ecuador, or whatever it is, right? If you're in that survival of the fittest mentality, then you can be a good person who loves your dog and loves your kids, and, you know, and then do this.
Yeah.
So we have to change the myth to, say that life is a dance, for example. I mean, I'm proposing that, but um,
And that's a
that's
thing to do. I suppose you just, in one way, I think you got to do things through love, not through rage. Signing petitions through love for the planet, not through hatred for Chevron. Doing things from a place which doesn't carry any kind of knock-on effect, any kind of bad karma, as it were. For it's easy to say that. It's easy to sort of say that life is a dance, but of course there's practicalities to life too. There are indigenous
of
people
course.
who are,
But these, it's like the micro moments in your life, in your day. Like you said, like if you're signing a petition, and everyone who's watching, I hope you will. You'll follow Stephen and find that link when it comes up. But yeah, that moment you're signing it, rage can be useful. Rage can be a very powerful and effective emotion. But underneath, look underneath that. And if like you said, Robert, it's about loving the planet. It's about loving, animals in the Amazon. It's about loving the
maybe
water.
it's about
Rock. Then
sending letters to
it's giving it
Chevron
back.
saying, we love you. we're with you too. We're not against you.
It's hard. It's hard to do that. Let's admit, but
Let's send them flowers and chocolates and go, well done, guys, but let's see the bigger picture here. Let's zoom out the lens slightly and talk together.
There's this Buddhist. There's a story of the Buddha in the Pali Canon where there's a monk who knows about this demon, and the demon has been terrifying all the monks. And I can remember if it's the Buddha or one of his disciples is the only one who actually has the courage to walk in to the place where the demon lives, or maybe he lets the demon come in. But by having the courage to sit, I think he's sitting actually, if I remember correctly, by having the courage to sit as the demon approaches and to not move, he stays unmoving, and he stays in his position. And instead of running and screaming and bashing it on the head with a stick, he just sits there. And as the demon gets closer, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
And so, obviously we need to fight. Obviously we need to do what Stephen's doing. But somewhere deep down, if we can hold that idea of holding your ground,
people
you
non-compliant.
treat them like a giant Goliath, and they're going to look like it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so, like Stephen, in a way, your work, I think, has proven that there are a lot of holes in the back of this demon where pus and blood and death will flow out, and you'll see an empty bag afterwards. They're not as strong as we make them out to be. And I think it's important to hold that in our hearts, in our heads, because otherwise they're just going to be demons who stomp all over the planet.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I'll say that, one thing that I think this story really gives the opportunity to do in a really good way is to sort of look at this perspective of the communities down in the Amazon, and really tell the extraordinary story of their courage and bravery and determination to stick with this all these decades, and also how those of us in the North who've been really privileged enough to have the opportunity to do this work in such an intimate way with the affected communities, we become enriched. I mean, this is kind of crazy, but when I first went down there as a graduate of Harvard Law, I was like, oh, I'm going to help these people. That was sort of my mentality. And I realized pretty quickly that they didn't really want that kind of help. What they wanted to do was enter into a collaboration to figure out a way together to use our respective areas of expertise to move this thing forward. And I can say after a lot of years, and not just saying this is really, really true. I went down thinking I would teach them about the law, and over the years, they ended up teaching me far more about life than I could ever teach them about the law or anything else. Just about the natural world and the relationship of forest peoples to defending the planet and the earth and life. And really, they're the frontline defenders of the earth. We're just sort of hanging on in the background, trying to, I think, support them. And, you know, it's been an extraordinary ride. And I think my personal growth and really being on this journey has surprised me, honestly. It's changed me in so many ways. And, you know, it's sort of received wisdom from people who just pass it on for thousands of years about the world that's been sort of taken out, extracted from our beings as Western, because we live in such an acquisitive, commercially exploitative culture, you know, but they don't. So sort of to understand how I came to be, you know, up to the point I had contact with them, and then how I've grown since. It's really fascinating. I mean, it's and this is why really we all need to sort of spend time down there and spend time with these frontline defenders who really are in touch with the natural world in ways that are just so different than we have been historically.
Mm-hmm.
Even is there a kind of a cleanup effort going on, irrespective of Chevron and their unwillingness to pay for their mess? Is there a volunteer cleanup effort happening down in Ecuador? And I suppose if so, is there some info about that and potentially a way to support that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So, you know, the damage is so extensive that it would really, to actually clean it properly would require a huge amount of technical expertise and billions of dollars. But, and you know, we haven't been able to get that yet because Chevron won't comply with the legal judgment. But in the meantime, there are projects that really help people, you know, in terms of medical treatment and supplying clean water. I mean, the biggest problem right now is there's no clean water. It's all the natural water sources are contaminated. And I want to give a shout out to Trudy Styler, wife of Sting, who several years ago started a water project in conjunction with UNICEF, where they built tanks that were put on the roofs of people's homes to capture rainwater and also, you know, filter it. So it's so bad, actually. There's like gas flaring that often rainwater comes down with black soot in it because of the flaring of gas into the air. It creates dioxins and it's black clouds, and it's bad. And it's not always like that, but sometimes it's like that. So in any event, Trudy did a great job filtrating, creating these tanks that are in a lot of people's homes. And there's a group called Amazon Frontlines that continues on with that project, building tanks. And, you know, they can be found on the web, Amazon Frontlines. And that's one way people can directly help provide clean water to the people affected in the meantime, before we get what we hope will be the money to do the actual cleanup.
To comply with the legal ruling.
Right.
And if you're watching this, Chevron, come on, do the right thing, lads. You know, it goes forward. Your kids' kids aren't here yet, but they are here. You know, they're sort of here, and they're already wearing shoes and gasping for air. So, and currently it's your fault. So you have the choice to make that right if you can. So
yeah, and,
you know.
and if I may just mention one more time again, you can get a lot more information at our website, freedonziger.com. And next week, we're going to have the petition up to press the U.S. government to issue me a pardon. And that's part of the long process of dealing with this problem, you know, right? I mean, how can the U.S. government, by the way, let one of its own private companies go to another country and essentially dump billions of gallons of toxic waste and do nothing about it? I mean, you know, there's so many ways in which the U.S. government, I think, is undermining its credibility in the world. I mean, there's other examples.
Let us count the ways.
Yeah, many examples as of late in particular. But like, you know, it's not good for peace, for tranquility, for credibility, for foreign policy, for democracy, for the rule of law, for one country to let a private corporation in its own country go into some other country and just destroy people, which is what Chevron has done in Ecuador. So we need to move the Biden administration to really, you know, walk the walk on some of these environmental issues.
I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm not sure. People are saying that I haven't done a live this long in a while. It might cut off. So it might not, but I just, in case it cuts off in the middle of the sentence, I wanted to to
To
sort of
warn folks, yeah, yeah.
apologize in advance. I think they extended the live length to many hours, but it used to cut off after an hour. But if it does, anyway, we're at that second mark right now. It hasn't cut off, so we'll see. Sorry to interrupt you. I just didn't want it to happen in a rude way.
That's all right. I mean, you know, we've pretty substantially covered things. I'm wondering, are there any other questions, Ari, or
No,
my
I'm trying to read what people are saying as flying by. Other than that, you know, they want to marry you, Robert. But
the only thing is, Steve, so, yes, to all of you, let's commit bigamy together. We'll start a cult. Yeah, my comments have frozen, by the way, down the bottom, and so
okay.
I can't really see any.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to see stuff that's going by, and people are you know, supporting it. People are asking me to save the live. I will save the live if Instagram lets me, if it doesn't glitch out, and I'll post it on my Instagram and share it with you guys if you want it.
Yeah.
I guess we can wrap up. I just want to say that, you know, both of you are super inspiring in your own ways, and I just want to share that Robbie, the reason, you know, I didn't bring him into this frivolously. I do think he could make a great Steven Donziger and maybe a limited series, Hello Hollywood, and one that might actually be from the perspective of the Ecuadorian indigenous people, and he comes in as a stranger. Might be an interesting way to approach it. But also that Robbie's doing these comics that on Rewriting Extinction, which is another site that is really cool, and I talked to him a few days ago. That you're making your own art that is supporting environmental awakening, and I think that's really cool, as well as writing a book about meditation.
Yeah, all the above. Thanks, Ari. I appreciate it. And you're incredibly inspiring too. You've got a zine coming out called Fogtown, right? Which is launch in May at Cannes, I believe.
Hold on one second. I have here's a little sample. A little sample.
Oh yeah.
So this is the primary thing: is wake up, and this is Mother Earth in the form of trash, telling our heroine to get with the program and become a leader. So yeah, it's pretty cool, and it's about you know, bicycle gangs fighting against cars. So
awesome. Who did the animation for it?
There's a guy named Travis. Oh my God, Travis. Forgive me. What is your last name, Travis? Travis Hansen. Did the art for us, and yeah, we're developing it. I've written it as a TV series and a movie, and we're gonna get it made. So
that's the real story, the real Donziger story from the perspective of the Ecuadorians, and the fantastical Avatar-like moral fable of Fogtown.
Exactly.
You've got both.
Well, this
sides.
interview, we're going to take pieces of this interview, and we're going to print the zine as issue 1, where the comic is in here, but then also this conversation with, you know, Eric Watson, who produces for Darren Aronofsky. We have activists, we have other storytellers, all talking about this issue of how do we tell stories that wake people up. And so the Fogtown zine will be a way to, you know, to share ideas and hopefully inspire each other to take action, change our dreams, do whatever we can to be part of a kind of new awakening.
Absolutely. Here. I second that.
So, and actually, if anyone wants to submit art, they can go to fogtown.com. We are still, for a few more weeks, taking random submissions. If people draw a doodle of something that inspired them, or something that moved them, or something that broke their heart that has an ecological bent, go to fogtown.com and upload your art, and we'll run it once we launch in May.
Amazing.
So.
Awesome.
Gentlemen.
Thanks, Ari, for organizing this, for your support and your great work and what you add to the culture of this world, man. All the power to you. And let's keep talking about trying to get this story out there. And I need protection still. So again, I'll just ask people, if you can, try to follow me on Instagram at Steven Donziger, and on Twitter at @sdonziger. It helps. And, you know, we'll just keep pushing. Hopefully we can do that.
We got your back.
Yeah.
Appreciate
freejohnziger.com.
Yeah.
Sign that
Yeah.
petition.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Blessings to you and blessings to everyone listening. And go plant a tree or something tonight just to feel good.
Love to you all. God
Bye.
bless.
Thank you.
Bye.